successive prime ministers and ambassador to the UK, to the US in Washington until Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, between them, cooked up his departure. Kim, lovely to see you. What do you make of what we've heard and what we know so far?
Alistair, first of all, thanks for reminding everyone, me included, of that feels like a golden era, that era in number 10, you know, it really does. I mean, so much has gone wrong since. And, you know, I always think back on that as that was a really effective government. But enough propaganda. Look, this feels very much like 2016 to me. I remember sitting in the embassy in the early hours in 2016, watching the last votes come in. And once Pennsylvania was called, then it was all over. And I fired off a telegram to London straight away. 2020, of course, it was also quite close and went dragged on and on and on. But this feels very 2016-ish. And I think you're right. I think it's nailed on for Trump now. And it's quite possible, I think, that he might sweep all of the battleground states as he did in 2016. Look, there's going to be a huge post-mortem in the Democrat Party. I think two things stand out to me. First is, I think the economy, performance of the economy, and especially inflation, which was up at 7% in 2022, is what has killed the Democrat chances. And second, I'm afraid Joe Biden, although he was a consequential and relatively successful president, but particularly for his first 2 years, he should never have run in 2024, should never have run, and they should have had a proper primary process in which, you know, a candidate would have emerged having come through that extraordinarily testing process and with the American public with a much better idea of who the candidate was. Giving Kamala Harris, although, you know, she didn't do badly, 109 days to introduce herself to the American people, just wasn't long enough. But I think the economy has been the biggest thing, and I think that's why Donald Trump is going back to the White House, despite the fact, Alistair, that in the first term, the performance of the economy under Trump for the first 2.5, 3 years was basically bang average. Then it all fell apart with the pandemic. So the economy was not great for Trump, but people have short memories.
Kim, tell us, if you were working with the British Foreign Office, you were the ambassador to Washington, or you were advising the British government now, and let's imagine, for the sake of argument, a Trump administration is now coming in. What are the big do's and don'ts for Britain from January onwards in dealing with the new Trump administration? And how on earth do you deal with what he thinks about the Middle East, what he thinks about Ukraine, Russia, what he thinks about NATO?
First of all, Rory, it's a very good thing that Keir Starmer took time out from his last trip to the States to go off and have a meal with Trump and meet him. Trump loves people to come and play court to him. And going to see him and doing that is exactly the kind of thing that he would expect. Doesn't mean you get a huge amount of gratitude for it, but it's kind of, you get to first base having done that. Also think the phone call that he made to Trump after this first assassination attempt was a good idea. And I think it was an idea of the British embassy Washington at the time, and that was a good move as well. What I would say about when Trump gets into office is you have to do your best with what will be quite a difficult man to persuade on things. If you go back through Trump's history, you go back to the 70s, to the 80s, the 90s, he thought the same things about trade, about America's intervention overseas, about America shouldn't be the world's policeman, all this sort of stuff. He was saying that sort of stuff back in the 80s and 90s. He doesn't change his views easily. You look at his first term, some of the adults in the room who were mainstream Republicans slowed down some of the stuff he wanted to do, like withdrawing from the Paris climate change deal, like the tariffs he introduced on steel and aluminium, like withdrawing from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. They slowed it down. They didn't stop it. So if you think of three of the most worrying bits of foreign policy that Trump has committed to delivering, leaving the Paris deal again, stopping American arms supplies to Ukraine, and these 10 to 20% tariffs on all imports into America, you have to raise those issues with him and challenge him on them and explain why they're a really bad idea, all of them. You have to keep working at it. Hopefully, all the Europeans will be saying similar things, except for old Viktor Orban in Hungary. Put pressure on him. But, don't have expectations. It's all going to be fine. And prepare for the worst while trying to persuade him to change his ideas. Because
And Kim, can I just jump in there? We talked in the previous live stream to Karen Pierce, your successor, who, to her credit, I have to say this, when we saw her at the DNC in Chicago, she was so punctilious, and so she kept trying to say to me. She actually introduced me to Republicans to try to get onto the podcast because she thought we were slightly going away with the fairies, thinking it was all nailed on for Kamala Harris. But how important will it be that she and the embassy line up all the right things, that getting one of the early phone calls, saying the right things at this time, how important is that to the job that she's doing, and how important is that that sort of basic, very basic diplomacy?
The very basic stuff is essential, Alistair. You're absolutely right. And when Trump won in 2016, we got him into the White House pretty much the first working days after inauguration, the first foreign visitor to get in to see him. The phone calls, by the way, back in 2016 were a shambles. I think the first phone call he took was from the Indonesian president, or something like that, because they threw away the list that had been prepared and just did it at random. So I wouldn't worry too much about the phone call, but the first visit will be important. And, the right tone in congratulations, the right sort of approach when Keir Starmer walks into the Oval Office for the first time with Donald Trump, trying to get the right tone to all of that. It's very important. But it's going to be 4 years of quite a hard slog, it just is. And the guaranteed thing with Donald Trump is that there will be unexpected upsets and incidents and blips all the way along. He will tweet something at 5 a.m. in the morning that suddenly causes a big kerfuffle and becomes a big story in the UK. I mean, like the America First videos that he retweeted in, I think, November 2017, that Theresa May had to say he was wrong to do that. That sort of stuff is going to happen. Like the thing that happened during the campaign over Labour Party workers going to campaign for Harris. That sort of stuff is certain to happen. Be prepared for it.
Kim, how do we get the balance right on the one hand, the statement that he's meant to be an Anglophile, famously he keeps telling us that his mother liked the Queen, and on the other hand, the fact that he may well be doing things that we think are completely monstrous on climate, on Ukraine, on the Middle East, on protectionism. How do you, it was challenging, presumably, for Alistair when he was dealing with George Bush, but this is another level of challenge to the special relationship, right?
It's absolutely another level, because these are policies that will impact directly on us and will potentially do a fair amount of damage, particularly the tariffs, and it'll be very, very hard to deliver our climate change objectives internationally if America is left the deal. So these are things that impact on the whole of the rest of the world. I would be cautious, Rory, too much about Trump being an Anglophile. Yes, he has a Scottish mother, but he's always rather resented the fact that despite, in his eyes, basically being sort of half from the UK, that he's not more feted over here as a guy who is partly British and has done so well over in America. And he rates about 18% on approval ratings over here. So he always rather resents that. And he is very, very America first. Whatever his supposed Anglophilia, there were no favours to the UK on tariffs and things like that during his first term. So it is another level of difficulty. And at a time when geopolitics has never been more fragile, more unstable, and more dangerous, I just take a big gulp at the thought that he is back in the White House and think what a huge job all of us, all the rest of the countries in the West, in Europe, have in trying to get this guy onto what I would say is a more sensible path for some of the big challenges that we face today.
Well, Kim, it's lovely to talk to you. I can tell you're pretty stunned by the whole thing. I think an awful lot of people will be, but thank you very, very much.
What I have been saying, I do quite a lot of talking about this. I've been saying to the business groups I've been talking to that Trump is the favourite. So I've got 3 more of those today, and I can at least say to them, well, as I predicted.
Not
what I wanted.
You and Dominic Sandbrook both. Well, thanks very much indeed. See you soon.
Thanks, Alistair.
Thank you. Bye-bye.